Sunday evening. Cloud natives, how's everyone doing?
Pretty good. I'm kind of
So,
excited to talk to Greg here.
so today we're going to talk about continuous delivery. And in the context of that, we're going to look at a specific solution. Greg, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you work on, and then we'll play with the toys.
Okay, well, I'm Greg Turnquist. My Twitter handle's Greg Turn, and I'm part of the Spring team. So I started at VMware about 5 years ago, but normally by daytime I work on the Spring Data team, but I've been working on Spinnaker for, I don't know, 8 months or something. I think we actually came on and chatted briefly like a year ago or something like that on Cloud Foundry After Dark, and
Back when it was just a twinkle.
back when it was it's kind of amazing. Back then, I think I demonstrated it with a curl command, and it was pretty bare bones and non-existent. But at least from our perspective, it was very real in Netflix's land. But now they've gone and open sourced it as of this past Monday, and we have a nice, cool demo to show off here tonight or this morning, depending on where you are.
So why don't you talk a little bit about what was there, what's been built since then, and what you're going to demo?
Okay, well, I can tell you Netflix and Google have been hard at it for probably 2 years. Google's been in it for at least a year or something. So they've got some really cool stuff built up. But what we've added in is we've added the bits that now Spinnaker, a system that Netflix uses to deploy like over 2,000 releases a day, we now have support where your target destination could be a Cloud Foundry instance. And because we come in through the front door using the Cloud Foundry library, it could be Pivotal Cloud Foundry, Pivotal Web Services, it could be IBM Bluemix, whoever upholds the public-facing API can be the recipient from Spinnaker deploys. And then the fun bit about it is to throw the curveball in, is I'll be running it. I actually have it running on Pivotal Cloud Foundry, so 4 Pivotal Cloud Foundry, 2 Pivotal Cloud Foundry. Sounds like that crazy movie Inception.
Spinnaker's deployed as an app into Cloud Foundry.
Yeah.
And then you're going to use it to deploy back to whatever Cloud Foundry, arbitrary Cloud Foundries.
Absolutely. And to throw in a little extra fun here, it's actually a microservice. So I actually have like 7 different components installed, and this thing.
So can you say bingo if you crossed off the card?
Wait a minute, there's a few more checkboxes to hit that. They wrote it with Spring Boot in the language of Groovy. So if you step into it, if you've been writing Spring Boot apps, you can look at the code and say, oh, I totally get what this is doing because I already know Spring. Groovy makes it more terse, but they also use some cool stuff like retrofit from Square to build interfaces, for instance. But
for the UI.
Yeah, but they also have some. The front end's written in Angular for those that like it, and if you don't like it, well, too bad. But it's
that last sentence kind of cut out for me. I don't know if it was
okay.
good.
The front end's written in Angular, and I don't know. There's a lot of people that like Angular out there, and there's a lot of people that do not like Angular. So
because JavaScript.
So
all right. Well,
if you don't go for that, too bad. But anyway.
Well, let's see what it does, and maybe we'll go from there. See what that opens up.
All right. Let me put up a little screen share here.
All right. So.
Okay. Let me click. Okay. Can you see my little Jenkins screen here?
In fact, I can.
Okay. Well, here's where I've got it deployed here on Pivotal Cloud Foundry. These are all the different little components running. I'm not going to talk about everything that they do here.
So Spinnaker is actually it's decomposed into these services.
Yeah, and there's several. The biggie is the one here at the top called Cloud Driver. This is the one that actually has all the cloud operations built into it. So this thing can talk to AWS, Google Compute Engine. I added support for Cloud Foundry. Since they've open sourced it, the number of the foot traffic coming in has been immense. A lot of people are interested in it. They're asking, what else? Does it support this? Does it support that, etc. and the other things are the different bits and stuff to respond to events happening and things like that, and carry out these real complicated deploys. And maybe I should step back and talk about what problem the thing is trying to solve.
Yeah, and absolutely. You can also tell people where they could go. There's, the GitHub and it's just like every other Netflix open source. It's kind of its own little branded thing.
Yeah, and they actually got, they even have a nice little video you can go check out if you want to go to it. But if you go to spinnaker.io, you can find out more about it. And I even got the new Cloud Foundry logo onto the webpage. So,
Nice.
but Netflix kind of had this big problem years ago, and that was they kind of went whole hog using Amazon's AWS service as their place of deployment, as their platform to deploy stuff at. But apparently the APIs or the UIs that came with AWS out of the box just didn't cut it for their high volume outputs. And today Netflix produces something like 2,000 releases a day. So we're talking like somebody polishes a line of code, they merge to master, they push out a release right away. And so they built this predecessor called Asgard, and just over, I guess lessons learned and battling in the trenches and just how things have ramped up and altered since that time, they've gone back and sort of revamped it or reimagined it, and out came Spinnaker, and they started that about 2 years ago. So it's designed to be able to look at different triggering sources. In their case, they use Jenkins as their tool to build. Just I happen to have a Jenkins instance set up here on Pivotal Cloud Foundry. But what they do is they bake an image, and then they turn around and deploy the image out. They turn it into an AMI or a Amazon machine image.
So I think that's an interesting point. Not that I want to stay here too long, but the way that Netflix was building their architecture was microservice architecture that was VM based, going back like 5 years, right? So everyone that's enamored with the way people are doing container deployments, they were doing essentially the same exact method, but they were using the AMIs and baking those.
Yeah, and this is what they call, they call this baking, the sense that, you build a jar file or something, but you wrap it up in a Debian package and then bake it into a machine image. And then you can go out and roll that thing out to as many copies as you need, scale up, scale down, whatever. But
there were some interesting discussions in the different parts of the kind of DevOps communities about baking versus frying, where baking was this like hardened image versus the way that some of the configuration management tools mutate state on the running systems. So that's language that other people use in the same context or slightly different contexts.
And what Amazon, what Netflix was specifically doing with Amazon, as I understand it too, is they were taking those AMIs and dropping those in the launch configs for the auto-scaling groups.
Absolutely. Well, it's evolved because when they started, they didn't have those, right?
I don't know. Well, when they started doing this, I don't think AWS's auto-scaling was the way it is now. But
exactly. Anyway, keep going.
Well, their whole thing is, and this is what took me a while to ramp up to understand, is that when they bake an image, they roll it out, they basically deploy an app. If there's something wrong with the app, or they find a bug, whatever. When they patch it, they don't go back and edit or redeploy to the same app. Instead, they just roll out an entirely new image, and then you basically get rid of the previous one.
Which
so it's constantly pushing it forward into the right direction.
The way people are describing this, or the language a lot of people have adopted, is that this is called immutable infrastructure.
Exactly.
Which is probably another checkbox on your bingo card if you're playing at home.
Yes.
Yes, the home game.
It kind of reminds me of there was like a file system built years ago, and I don't know if it was more than academic, but it was sort of an immutable file system in that files were never deleted. Instead, you would to overwrite a file, essentially you put out a new file that sort of took the place of the previous one, but you could always go back in time and find old data. Something like called OS9 or something like that. So, but anyway, pressing on here, I have a little Jenkins job set up here with a little toy app called Spring Data REST Demo because I happen to work on Spring Data REST as a fun portfolio project. But this UI is, I don't know, lacks a little bit of glamour in my opinion. So instead, I want to go over and look at this one instead.
So
this is
I mean,
the actual.
that was the standard Jenkins, right? That was the Jenkins UI we were
Yeah,
starting
this
on.
is Jenkins UI, and this actually is the enterprise copy that we include with Pivotal Cloud Foundry. If you're a client, whatever, you can install this, and then you, I guess, go and submit, get a CloudBees license. So if you're going to go in here and try to do any kind of pipeline stuff, you would have to go in and into this job and go into the configuration steps, and then go piece together in this user interface.
I know how this game is played. You add post-build actions, and then it yells at you because you can't have another post-build action, and everything is sadness.
It's, you know, to me, it's you're slapping stuff together with wire and tape and stuff to try to do it in here, and it's crazy. And you've probably got a lot more experience with that than I do, Bridget.
Not to get people too excited, but I think Concourse is the first CI system that was developed after this newer architectural approach was apparent, right? Like Jenkins was born in the world where you CI'd monoliths.
Yeah, anyway, I mean, I think I would like to actually see what kind of interactions, if any, there are between Spinnaker and Concourse, or what could be devised, because I think that'd be interesting. But the idea of focusing on pipelines as a first-class citizen is obviously pretty important. But so, Greg, what are you showing us here? You're moving over to the Spinnaker.
Okay, so the Spinnaker.
So this is the Spinnaker UI. Let me refresh it, and you get the little. Okay. So I've got this thing geared up through parameter settings to look at three different spaces I actually have on my PCF setup. So I happen to have it for fun looking at that space where I saw the Spinnaker stuff. But down here is my little demo app here. So I can dive into it. And what I'm getting at a glance here is on the left-hand side I got like a little filter box. I can flange down on this, but I'm looking at an application, and here's where there's some terminology you have to pick up on. So, you know, this is what I refer to as my application, and when I say application, I mean I can go back to GitHub and find this application. There's one repository that has the source code and the truth of knowledge about this app in GitHub, but the application in Spinnaker doesn't really map to application in Cloud Foundry. Instead, what I have is inside this application, I've defined a couple clusters. You can think of a cluster as a place where you would go to route traffic. Like if someone's going to come visit your app, they need to come visit a cluster. Not so much like a classic cluster that you have a certain hardware product that toggles between two different servers, for instance. But instead, you know, I like have this production cluster up here, and I also happen to have a staging cluster down here. And in theory, you would have some kind of load balancer between all these instances down here within the cluster. And the closest thing I would see mapping this onto would be a Cloud Foundry route. The idea that you can deploy several applications, but you can route them, you know, map a route onto each of them. And so the traffic would go to all these instances down here. And if you look down here, here's where I actually have each individual Cloud Foundry application that happens to be deployed right now. And these down here are what you would call a server group, which when I click on this, I get a little bit of detailed information over here on the right.
So just for my benefit, what's the difference of the build numbers, and what are we looking at? There's a kind of like other numbers and information that's available.
Okay. So this one is, you notice it's got like a version number in here?
Indeed.
Okay, so like if I pick this one down here, it says V120. This is my server group. This little tiny chiclet at the bottom shows that I actually have one instance of this running in Cloud Foundry. You know, if I scale it up to 4 instances of this app, I would see 4 chiclets down here. This little hyperlink is telling me that this was built against Jenkins job 1120. And it's actually a hyperlink to take me back to Jenkins, and if I want to go look up the details of that build job. Now over here, I clicked on this thing. It was in this cluster, SDR demo production v120, and if you look over here, you can actually get the full name of what this is. This server group, SDR demo production v120. And if I flip back to PCF and go to my production space, give it a few seconds here. We can see that that's. You'll notice we have one app per version here.
So go back to the Spinnaker thing. I'm just trying to map it into my own understanding.
Yeah, so you
So
can
what's
see
the relationship? What's the relationship between all the things that are in that? V142, 123, 121.
Yeah, each of these boxes maps one-to-one to a Cloud Foundry app over here. You notice these 1, 2, 3, 4. They're just.
But those are different. They're different apps. They're not
different.
apps.
Yeah, they're different. These are different. These are different Cloud Foundry applications. But you can think of it as these are all different versions of the same code that have been deployed to Cloud Foundry.
And so, is there some logic somewhere? Because it looked like those are mapped to the build number from Jenkins, sort of. Is that just coincidence?
When you actually run a build job, metadata gets traveled in and it gets linked inside Spinnaker between the two. And if I actually go drill down into this particular one, what you're going to notice is I actually have my little module adds some bonus data in here.
Okay, good. So that's what I was going to ask, is if you're preserving some of the information from the Jenkins build, like in Spinnaker, because you know how with Jenkins you can configure it and like it might only keep the last 10 or whatever.
Yeah, and here's where I'll tell you, this is right now in alpha state. This is like what I would call demo code. What I have, you want to definitely reach a state where Jenkins does your build job. Like you configure.
I lost Greg.
Yeah, I stopped being able to hear him too. I can still see him.
I saw him mute himself, or did you mute him?
I didn't mute him. It looks like he muted himself and maybe unmuted himself. So what I'm really interested in, hopefully we get Greg back soon, but what I'm really interested in about this is that the information that, say, an external build system like Jenkins may or may not have, if you have to go back and query that, which, ideally is your single source of truth or whatever, but if you're not storing any of that information inside something external to Jenkins, like, say, Spinnaker, Jenkins can be a little lossy it's not really intended to keep all data about all builds forever.
Just in some sense, the way that it was initially imagined, it's just creating the artifact. Like, it doesn't actually keep any metadata, right?
Right. So you can keep some metadata for Jenkins around, but it's interesting to me, Greg, we were just discussing that it's interesting that you're pulling some information out of Jenkins and kind of preserving it with the specific artifact.
So, yeah, I think that's interesting, but one of the things I'm curious about, I want to go up from the what, and let's talk a little bit about why, and frame that with respect to, you just said this is kind of what you consider alpha code, so what do you think the difference between whatever's there and whatever you need to make this a part of whatever your workflows for deploying code are, and how will you proceed, or what do you think what do you think that would look like for someone who is interested in applying this to something they're doing?
Well, can you hear me okay now?
I can.
Okay, good. Well, what I say by alpha is right now my demo, essentially when it deploys to Cloud Foundry, what it does first is it goes back to Jenkins and it pulls the artifact down from Jenkins, and then it deploys it. And in communicating with the people who have been working on this a lot longer, they say the more solid approach is Jenkins needs to publish your artifacts to a more permanent repository location. That could be bin tray, that could be S3, whatever you want, and you should be pulling from a more permanent version of a repository, because that way, if your Jenkins build goes away tomorrow or somebody deletes the build, you're not suddenly in catastrophe land. And for I haven't figured out how to actually deal with all that stuff yet. So right now I have it coded, and the way it's coded, it can only talk to one Jenkins instance to do this Cloud Foundry deployment step to get a good wiggle out of the system. But the thing can actually support talking to any number of Jenkins systems, etc.
Well, that makes perfect sense, and I fully, wholeheartedly approve of the push your artifacts to some sort of artifact store that you keep them in. Don't just keep them on your build server. I think that also, like, PCF has integrations with a number of these, choices, right? So, like, you can kind of decide which one you want to use.
And then something I haven't shook out yet is, like, I've tested this very heavily against working with this instance of Jenkins, which I found out has a different path than the OSS Jenkins. So, if you go in and set up a OSS version of Jenkins and you don't use the pjenkins tile, I cannot confirm that my module will work with that one properly yet.
Well, sure, but again,
is that because it's using the file system, the way that it sends the artifact? Has to know the path to the.
They've hard coded some bits where the staging the stage in Spinnaker where they pull down where they get the information from Jenkins, they pull apart the URL to get, like, the job number and stuff, and then they put together the URL. And the whole thing is they're making an assumption about the URL.
Wait, what? They don't have to do that to get the job number. There's a variable in Jenkins that lets you get the job number. Okay, whatever. These are details.
So they had some URL parsing logic in there that's, like, I found out didn't fit the bill when you use pjenkins, for instance.
So this is logic in the Spinnaker code.
Yeah. So there's stuff to clean up, and this is they've got it working in their system, and so this is what happens now when you go open source is people start using it in other configurations, and you find out how flexible is your solution. And so this is like one of these inflexible points I bumped into, and I kind of coded around it for demo purposes. So now I've got something that a little more eye candy here. I'm going to go over and show off they have one of these nice little. So I can pull up this dashboard. Thing is flickering up here. Maybe I'm not gonna do the dashboard. I'll just go to the pipeline screen here. Let me get this lingering pipeline. I'm gonna bump it off here. Okay. So here's the pipe. These are the pipelines related to that app, SDR demo, and I can actually go into the configuration screen for it and show you what this pipeline looks like. So over here on the left-hand side, here's our where it starts off, and it starts off with a trigger. So down here's where I picked the Jenkins stuff, my parameter settings for which job it was going to watch. They also, right now, they support either being triggered by Jenkins, by another pipeline, or by a cron job. This is definitely where we're interested to say, let's go add some hooks for maybe being triggered by a concourse, or or get triggered by bamboo, for instance, because I know.
So pipeline here would be another Spinnaker pipeline. That's what it means.
Mm-hmm.
And then what does cron mean exactly?
Well, this is if you want to have a pipeline kicked off by some time-based expression.
So it'll be time inside a Spinnaker. It's not actually. So you say, okay, like every 15 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know where the process lives. I don't know if this could be using Spring's scheduled. It could be using. Spring has a cron expression support inside the scheduled annotation. I don't know if that's what they're using because they are using Spring, but they could be delegating that out to some other service. I haven't actually used it, so I don't know.
Okay, so then what are the rest of the menus? I'm just trying to take all this in. So.
They have a flag here. Like by default, it'll actually run parallel stuff. It'll run stuff in parallel, but you can flip that off if you don't want it to be. If you don't want it to run concurrently. I guess you can have multiple triggers, which I'm not sure if is that additive or is it and or I'm not sure. They have now down here's I think you can put in extra parameters, like you can probably configure some specific data that's going to travel along through every stage with this parameter stuff down here. And at the bottom is the part I find most appealing, and that's the notification options here, which you can actually set notifications at every stage of this pipeline. And they have support for email, HIP chat, SMS, and I haven't pushed it out to this copy yet, but I actually added support for Slack about a week and a half ago.
Nice.
Interesting. So how many people went, I mean, this all went on the press or blogs or whatever a week or so ago, and what kind of traffic has there been on the mailing list, and what kind of interest you think there is to
They run a separate Slack group, and I'd say within 24 hours I saw 150 people join that chat channel. So that's the way we've had most communication was over Slack channel. I'm trying to see if they should have it over here. Okay, here's your updated. 48 users online, 439 registered. Before it went public, we had about 20 people registered to that channel. So that would be
Cool.
squared. Yeah, that would be.
And that's been like a week.
Yeah. Everyone's like, "What's Netflix up to? We got to get in on that." But here, this is really, for a web interface, I'm really impressed. All I did, let me just click here, click around to each little phase. It's flexible. Each of these is what's called a stage, so I can sit there and say, I'm going to add a new stage right down here, and you can chain them together however you need to. But here's the real meat
When you
of
say like deploy the production, how does this use?
Yeah, explain what we're looking at here.
Okay, down here is where.
And explain the problem it solves.
Okay, what I've designed this pipeline that it's when Jenkins builds a new artifact, it will cause Spinnaker to launch this pipeline. This pipeline is going to deploy a copy of that app into my production PCF space and also into my staging PCF space. So it's going to push out 2 copies of the app. That way my staging copy is always going to be up to date with production. Now it's possible for somebody to come along and manually push something like a newer test copy or something into staging, and then when they're ready to, they're gonna make their change. They're gonna merge to master, and Spinnaker would then say, okay, time to deploy that to production, and time to sync up staging to match that as well.
So the way that this pipeline is constructed now is probably not the logical way you would do deployments, right? Because you're just pushing both of them to both the environments. There's no staging actually. They're both going to the same. Does that make sense?
What do you mean there's no staging?
I mean there's a staging environment, but you're not actually staging anything because they both have the same deployment.
Oh yeah, I mean it's basically, this is to prove that it'll sit there and push out the copy to 2 different spaces at the same time.
Sure. But I mean, my mental model is like you would go to staging to stage something so you could, I don't know, verify or whatever before it went to production. So there's no step here that's staging. They're both simultaneously getting the same code.
Actually, that's an interesting question. I should probably be able to re-rig this to. If I took this one out.
I mean, from a pipeline perspective, what I would probably have is. Your artifact goes into some staging, then you run a bunch of smoke tests or whatever against it. Then, how does this relate to things like canary deployments, or is that handled by some other tool?
Oh, I'm going to add in. They have an option called manual judgment. So I'm going to say, first automatically deploy to staging, then. Let's do a manual check, and we're going to have a little pop-up instruction for the person and say, hey, does this pass the staging smoke tests? And, can't see the icon because of this thing. Okay, and then after this, I can say, let me add another stage. If that passes, let's do another deploy to Cloud Foundry task, and this time I'm going to send it to production.
What I think is amazing, especially coming from the Jenkins example, is how fast you were just like moving these things around, and it's like now you have a new pipeline.
It is. It's like, oh wait, you had we're discussing an idea. Let's put it out there.
Yeah, that's very cool. Now, of course, my immediate question when I see you dragging things around on a screen is, okay, how do you commit to some sort of source control and versioning the changes that you've made to your pipeline? Does this like dump out a bunch of YAML, or how do you track this?
What it
How does somebody reproduce it?
Okay, what I can tell you is the pipeline here is it's a big JSON document, so you can actually go in here and just do it by hand if you wanted to. But I believe they write the JSON. I'm trying to remember. This is either written into Cassandra or this one's written. I think this one may be written into Redis right now. As for versioning the pipeline, I'm not sure that it's built right off the handle. There's no sense of like I got to commit this change. It's basically I need to save it, but I think you can. I think you can clone a pipeline to roll out like another version of a pipeline, but I think it's kind of by hand.
Sure. I mean, like you said, this is all still in progress, but from like an operability standpoint, that's the kind of questions I would ask before I wanted this, going anywhere near actual production.
Now, for the fun part, I can back up here and launch it. That was a previous job. I'm just going to clear that out of here. Okay, so we don't have any executions. I'm going to go over to Jenkins, and I'm going to say, all right, Jenkins, let's make sure we're still logged in here, and I'm going to manually kick off this. This is simulating somebody making a change. Here's my nice, cool 1990s style progress bar here, waking up. And over here, I'm sitting there monitoring the Cloud Driver module that's actually talking to Cloud Foundry. And it's starting to see if we see a little action here shortly. Right now, it's just kind of polling to get the state of all the existing apps right now that are on Cloud Foundry. Let's see. Okay, now it's starting to see. We can see these deploy operations down here on the right. So it looks like it's deploying a copy to staging. Let's go back up here and look at the nice screen. Okay, look. So you can actually see each stage, in summary here. So if I can click that, it's telling me that deploy to staging worked and that I actually have SDR demo staging version 124 up. And I should be able to verify that by going over to the staging workspace, or staging space, and seeing it and see, yeah, here's version 124 up. Or almost up.
So is Spinnaker smart enough with the way that it queries those stages or the spaces and the rest of the stuff we just sort of saw scrolling by to recognize that something got out of sync with the state that it thinks it has? Like what if you go and kill the apps that it thinks it's deployed? Will Spinnaker ever notice that, or?
On this screen, no. With this screen is telling me did it successfully deploy it. Not there is a step to see if it got up. It waited to see if it came up, but if it turns around and crashes after that, that's not part of the pipeline. But,
I mean, just like in the operational lifecycle, say you had an app deployed and everything's fine, and then some subset of your infrastructure just crashes. Is Spinnaker involved in figuring out what's going on and recovering that, or is it just kind of a dumb pipe that you now have to?
It'll give me a readout. Like the state of all this state is based on reading the system, and I can see.
So that's the ground truth that it's getting actually querying the Cloud Foundry.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So then, if those underlying, if you go and kill those, we should see them disappear from Spinnaker.
Yeah.
And then
so here it's like you can see that I have V124, but there's no little second chiclet underneath here like the others have.
Yeah.
Which is kind of perplexing, but because I thought it would have worked.
So if there's no chiclet, it means that it doesn't know there's an instance, or does it?
Well, that says it cannot see. That's like the same as seeing 0 instances up.
So if you go back to Cloud Foundry and if we kill one of the instances, how long till Spinnaker notices we killed it?
probably within a couple minutes at the polling rate that I have. So that was V120 down here in staging. The part I said, while it's doing that, I can go over here and notice that it's in yellow on my manual judgment, and it's asking me, hey, does this thing pass your smoke tests?
Ship it.
Say yes. Ship it, as Josh would say. Can we ship it? Can we ship it?
So you said this is the polling rate is configurable?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I have it set to poll like every 60 seconds, but it takes about 2 minutes for it to poll the stuff that I have. So here it's in blue, so it's sort of in progress.
So that right there, that stage on the UI where it says monitoring deploy, I'm going to put it back on your screen. What is that actually? What's the logic of that monitor deploy?
Well, here's what it's doing. It's got, okay, so this is its Spinnaker's task-based system, which I should say under the hood is really Spring Batch. It's a bunch of like steps of a batch job. So I've got it defined where create deploy is essentially push the bits up to Cloud Foundry and then execute a start command. That's what gets captured in create deploy, and then when that task is there's a second task that comes after that is watching to see that the first task gets done. And so right now the version that you're seeing, as soon as you send the start application command to Cloud Foundry, it moves on.
So are these steps, create, deploy, monitor, deploy, wait for up instances, things that you created for your Spinnaker, or this is a kind of standard Spinnaker set of tasks?
This is the flow that they've kind of got laid out here, and so I actually have a patch to go fix this a bit and say launch the app, but let's hang around and watch it for a certain amount of time. Let's go watch it. If we detect that the app gets up, then let's let it on through, or let's time out after like 30 seconds.
But this is the code that is the Spinnaker workflow for task. It's not something that you configured for your particular deployment.
No. What I did is I did create a deploy to Cloud Foundry stage.
Right.
And in that I've defined the tasks that it executes, and like there's a couple extra tasks that I added on, like go back and refresh the cache state.
But that create deploy would be, it would use that step whether you're deploying to Cloud Foundry or one of the other targets for Spinnaker, and it would have the same kind of 3 steps for the logic.
In principle, yes. Again, because it's demo mode, the steps that I needed to execute seem to be a little different, so I kind of cloned the version that Google had, and my goal is that I can refactor it to get back to using some of their core bits. So I've had to like borrow some of their code, and because got complicated. Is that clear as mud?
Clear as software.
So that's what we had. Version 124 somehow didn't make it in staging, but here we can see the same version 124 here up in here in our production cluster, if you will. Now another critical nugget that's missing from this deploy step is that on AWS, like when Netflix is in production, because they're on AWS, this whole cluster, all these server groups are associated with a common load balancer. So the idea is when a flow would include, okay, we deploy this unit, let's add it to the load balancer so the traffic can get to it, but then they would do some of their canary deployment stuff and maybe let 10% of the traffic get to this one. And when it checks out, then move everything, move all traffic on that load balancer to the new node and get rid of the old ones.
So that's everything in the group would have the same load balancer.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea. And
so here where you have V124 or 142, 124, 123, those would all be under the same ELB on Amazon probably, or routes on.
Exactly, and I don't have that working yet, but my plan is to code it up to have support with using basically map a CF route to that.
So then with something like Spinnaker, if you have a backend on Cloud Foundry or backend on, how how flexible is it in the sense that you could take some of the build from a Spring Boot app and deploy it to Cloud Foundry or deploy it to AWS? Or is that sort of, they're like alternate pathways, or there's any sort of, I don't know,
Basically,
anything reusable?
I mean, any of these server group, each server group essentially is associated with what we call an account, and account translates to either you can deploy it to an AWS setup, or you can deploy it to a Cloud Foundry setup. So it can talk to multiple cloud providers at once. I don't think you can load balance between the two. I don't think anybody would care to.
That would be magic.
Now, the other thing is I have a whole bunch of copies released because I was warming up for tonight's presentation. But they also include a few strategies. Like they have red-black deployment strategy, so it'll hold on to the current one and the previous one, and then so if you put out a third copy, it's going to remove the first, etc.
And so that logic is baked into the Spinnaker? Like you could say
Yeah.
red-black, these whatever apps, and that would just work.
Yeah, that's baked into Spinnaker, and I currently can't handle that yet.
So it's logic. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, question about you were talking about Netflix using this with Amazon's load balancers. And so Amazon's load balancers have some specific things like connection draining or like cross-region or cross-zone load balancing, that sort of thing, that are like toggleable on the load balancer. Does Spinnaker have any of that built into it so that you can do any of that kind of dialing of the connections up and down inside Spinnaker, or are they still reliant on Amazon features for that?
I don't know. That is a good question, because they talk about they use ASG's auto scaling groups or something.
Right. That's.
And they talk about shrinking clusters and scaling clusters, and so I don't know how that operates on AWS because I have like zero experience on that.
Okay, I've done a bunch of that, and it sounds like that's stock vanilla AWS stuff. I was just kind of wondering if this stuff specifically was extracting some of that logic from AWS specific tools and putting it in the Spinnaker tool. I guess I can go look at the code.
I think they're trying to take what are maybe like, I don't know, SDKs or crude APIs and essentially put a very nice front end that makes it manageable. So I'm not sure where they would go out of their way to re-implement something versus let's leverage their stuff but in a more efficient manner.
I just remember hearing that some of this was more multi-cloud, which makes me think they might not be relying entirely on just Amazon-specific stuff.
I think they've tried to come up with like generic, like here are the generic operations that they have here that you can do to a server group manually: resize, disable, destroy, or clone. I've coded a couple of these. Like for resize, I coded it to go out and go bump up the scaled instances on Cloud Foundry.
So the way this works on the Amazon or Google Cloud is those actions would be integrated in starting virtual machines?
I think so, yeah. If you do these operations, it'll go out and talk to the actual cloud instance and push out the corresponding command. So you have to map it onto whatever the command is for that.
So then, just to kind of walk back through the logic, and we sort of started this story, Amazon AMIs would be the artifact that got created by some process that is either outside Spinnaker or Spinnaker like kicks it off somehow for the way that Netflix does their own stuff. And then they would push those AMIs and they would add them to these groups, and then the ELBs and the rest of it, you could scale them up or down with the server group actions.
Yeah, that's pretty good there. Just for fun, I found this is the easier way to clean out old copies of destroy server group. That's a background task. I can just close the window if I want to. Bump out this one. So kicking all these operations off asynchronously, so I can sit there and
Now this one's kind of interesting because Amazon typically isn't going to let you like delete an auto scaling group that still has live instances. So I'm just kind of, it's depending on exactly what they're calling there. It'd be interesting to see what the failure modes look like. Oh, this is all fascinating.
And here we got spinning actions to delete these two. And notice this is now spun up. I now have 2 instances of this guy.
So didn't you just try to delete that, or what? Why does it have 2?
Oh, this one I executed a resize command over here.
Oh, I see.
I scaled it up, and so theoretically we'd be able to add. You could add options, like right now it has just change the size of it, but theoretically I could, what did it say, advanced mode? You could theoretically go into there and no, I don't need that. I may have to customize it.
What does the percent mean on the right hand side?
I think it means 100% of the instances are up versus like if you had one instance was up and one instance was down, it's going to tally that as 50%. But
so it has notion of a sort of state of partial failure.
Actually, it has. Here's the legend for it: up, down, and in transition or out of service. So if you go to the Spinnaker.io site, they have a very nice web video on YouTube, and you actually get a snapshot of Netflix's thing, and in here in a given server group, you'll see 100 chiclets listed, and it'll be in the process of when they're doing their rolling stuff out, that they'll be ramping up, so new instances will be coming up or they'll be ramping down, and it's kind of interesting because it's like, what would it look like in Cloud Foundry? Do you need to run 100 instances of your app for it to operate properly? It's a interesting. Theoretically, eventually these 2 below here should vanish because I destroyed them. But anyway.
Do they exist on the? I mean, that was sort of the question I was asking earlier.
I'll go back to. And I also found it's
interesting to see. Go ahead.
It's faster for me to actually go in here and destroy old server groups through Spinnaker rather than going through the console on PCF, because I got to go drill into each app because there's no delete this app at the top level here. So I see 123, 124, and 142. Oh, there. That one at the bottom just dropped off. I try to destroy it. Oh.
Well, I think it's interesting to see not just the capabilities, but how these dynamics of the communities form as you see these projects that are born, and people get interested in stuff that's going on. Netflix open source has obviously already got some adoption and some community. Now you have just yet another thing from the Netflix open source that's out there. So that's almost as interesting to me as any of the code. So maybe make a comment about. I mean, we already saw the Slack channel was up to 400 people in a week. So, is there other points of interest or comments you'd make about how they work on that community, or the way that community will grow?
I just look at Netflix I think has a very good open source message. I think they're very effective at. We've built all this stuff. We've learned a lot of lessons, and we want to kind of help the community in general as well. And it's strange that I went and had dinner with some friends, and this guy that I chatted with is sort of a medical technician on hardware technology. He doesn't write software, and he says his own management is telling them they're going to adopt some new practices because it's the Netflix way. And I just found this an interesting sense of synergy that a lot of tech companies in totally different arenas are like saying we need to pay attention to how Netflix is doing business. So I think for us to ignore something like this that comes so close to home would be foolish. And
then it's also Spinnaker's interesting from kind of a Spring Pivotal perspective, because this is all being built on top of Spring Boot. Those microservices that we saw initially, like that's mostly Spring Boot or all Spring Boot, or what's the architecture there?
Oh, it's Spring Boot all the way, and I've been able to go in and actually help them on a few things. They had some, I don't know, like small wrinkles in the way they were doing stuff, because I tried to go in and leverage some of the override options, and they didn't work. And so I dug into the code and said, well, you're doing it wrong right here. And they were like, okay, send your pull request. I recoded it, and they looked at it. Okay, we can do that. And I even helped them, write some more documentation and stuff, because some of the people that are now coming on board and trying to read how to configure a YAML prop file are like, I don't understand all these prop settings that you have. It's like, well, let me write a detailed article describing Spring Boot override settings, for instance, for the people that don't have time to go over to our reference documents. So I think it's clear evidence that Spring's a killer way to build apps. Netflix is a killer builder of apps.
Long live the Spring. I kind of want to make a shirt that says "Spring is dead. Long live the Spring."
One of the prize gems that I have in that copy that I was demoing that I'm really working to get into the baseline of Spinnaker is Spring Cloud Config Server, because to go configure Spinnaker, you have to set like about 50 different property settings. So there's just it's very flexible.
So the config server, they don't use the Spring Cloud config server stuff?
No, it was funny in a chat channel when I was talking with the team lead about it. I said, I'm interested in adding Spring Cloud config server to it, and his response was like, Netflix would never depend on GitHub for its settings. We would never want to risk a GitHub outage impacting Netflix. That was like, okay, I think I understand your point. They apparently have their own variant of what would look like a config server, only they have it stored in Cassandra, but it generates a set of properties. But essentially, he was like, we don't have time right now because the open source is coming in 3 weeks, and they were heads down on polishing up everything for open source. So I think they're open to it now that we're past that hurdle, because.
And that's a good point. Like the whole who owns your availability thing. Like you can't have a GitHub outage affecting you.
No.
Just like you don't want to, if you can get away with pulling stuff off of a, artifact repository that you can control, or that you can at least control the availability of more than somebody else's. It's like, eh.
And you can run Git internally too, right? It's just a Git repo that you can run. So I don't know.
We can work with Git. We can tell our customers that also have the same fear. We're like, well, we get PCF, you got GitLab, or go do that. So you can control the Git repository, but I like it because it lets me pull that entire set of prop files all into one place. And I was like, once I discovered how it worked, I've decided that was my favorite Spring Cloud project.
Nice.
But I chatted with Spencer Gibb about that and shared that stuff, and he goes, "Oh yeah, Netflix wouldn't use our stuff like that." They already knew that; they'd heard that before. So I found it kind of humorous.
So just for those listeners that don't know, what does the config server actually do?
Okay, config server gives you sort of a central external place to go put all your property files. Spring Boot really nicely supports property files, and it's easy to go put in overrides. You can create new profiles dynamically and put them in your prop files. When you get into a cloud-native environment where you're deploying not one monolithic app, but 7 or 8 modules, you don't want to go into each one of those and be configuring environmental overrides for all these settings. It's a lot easier if you can put in maybe a couple settings that tells each module to, hey, go over to this config server because it's got the source of truth, and it will in turn get its information from a single GitHub repository.
And then can't you dynamically kind of kick the properties to a different value and have it?
That is correct. If you push out an update on GitHub, whatever, it sends a webhook call or whatever out to the config server, so it'll refresh its settings, and then there's options to, in turn, you can actually trigger events to go out to the microservices as well, and whether it's a direct call, or they also have support for like sending that over any message-based solution with Spring Cloud Stream, I think.
But I think it also gives you lots of tricks to do things like dark launches where you would toggle what features are available, or I don't know. There's a lot of things you could do with the config server logic.
Yeah, and it has support for labeling. So you talk about ops. You want to keep control over your settings. You can sit there and have branches with different property settings. So when you're ready to roll stuff out, you can roll out a new module, and you can tell this one module, I need you to use this branch over on the config server. Use the new branch with the new prop settings on it, and you can move your module one step at a time. And you
Right.
know, and even now, and then the next question is what about passwords and stuff? And it has support for, you can put secrets into your config server. You can secure the config server itself. And if you want to go all the way to the dark side, you bring that GitHub repository into GitLab, into your data center, and government contractors just love to hear that kind of stuff.
I think a lot of the in the Spring Boot, Spring Cloud Foundry workshop that was the full Josh Long experience at QCon. A lot of people were pretty excited to hear about specifically that, like exactly how they could manage things in the config server.
Yeah, and it's neat to go into each of these projects. Like config server's neat. The other one I'm interested I've been tinkering with was the Spring Cloud Netflix, which is kind of an ironic statement that they don't use Spring Cloud Netflix and Spinnaker, great Netflix-based system. But that project gives you the auto discovery. With the service registry, you can have the discovery feature, so each of the services can find each other. Right now, they're all configured by hand as to what IP address and port number to talk to each of the services.
So the Spinnaker doesn't use Eureka or the service discovery stuff.
They don't use Eureka in order to make all their REST calls. Spinnaker does integrate with Eureka in the sense that Netflix uses Eureka with its deployments. In the sense that when you roll out a new version of software, they talk about enabling and disabling a deployed copy. And that means whether or not you're going to link up to Eureka for the service, but not for Spinnaker itself to talk to all of its modules.
To configure itself.
Yeah. So I've been trying to figure out how to get it to do that, and the barrier to that is retrofit. Which retrofit, we don't have support. We don't have support in Spring Cloud Netflix for retrofit to go find stuff and use logical names instead of URLs. So Spencer Gibb actually wrote me a plugin that would support that, and I've tested it and run into weird issues that I haven't been able to figure out yet. But either figure that out or you switch a bazillion annotations from retrofit and instead use something like Fame. But
so we're at the top of the hour, and I don't know what everyone else thought, but I learned a lot of stuff about what Netflix is up to and how Pivotal is working with them. Do you have any sort of final last words or things you want to tell everyone?
Well, stay tuned. I go get in that because it's real hot and exciting, and people are really very interested in that stuff. So stay tuned, and I'm hoping we can turn this into a more polished service that customers can use, because I think it's going to be another big wave of stuff people are going to like.
I think it's pretty exciting. I know that people get excited about trying out stuff, that is Netflix open source, and this one in particular, I think is pretty cool. It has a lot of promise. Thank you for showing us this, Greg.
My pleasure.
I think the reality is everyone aspires to be able to do continuous delivery, and everyone knows that Netflix does it pretty well. So then it seems, fairly logical just to try to leverage some of the stuff they're doing. At the very least, you should expose yourself to what they're doing and what their capabilities are. If you decide you want to go rebuild something because you have a particular snowflake itch you want to scratch, then that's one thing. But I think just like everything else, it's always in your best interest to see if there's prior art and what they've accomplished before you start reinventing the square wheel.
Yes.
So true. So
unless anyone else has final words of wisdom, I think it's Sunday night. We'll call it and go on our way and do it again next week.
All right.
Sounds great.
Thanks again, Greg.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.